Okay, so welcome to everybody. I'm glad you could come out tonight. I'm Carolyn White, the president of League of Women Voters Park Rapids. And the Park Rapids League and the League of Minnesota is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of the major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Thank you for attending tonight's event. We also thank you for all the participants for taking the time to be there. We thank the members and our volunteers that helped put this program together and made all the arrangements. And we thank tonight's panel for coming and participating. Some housekeeping details. You all know about the refreshments. We went over that. And donations are always welcome to help cover expenses. Restrooms, for those of you that if you're new to the group, are back on this corner, so out the door and up the hallway. And please turn off all your cell phones. This event will be recorded, and if everything works right, we'll be posting it on our website. Please take your time to fill out an evaluation sheet that you were given when you signed in, and you can leave that on the sign-in table as you leave. And now I'm going to turn it over to Florence Dean, who is our program chair and who made all the arrangements for tonight, and she'll introduce tonight's panel.
Thank you, Cece, and for each of you who have come tonight to be a part of this great is it on? Sure. Better use it then, right? Being a part of this really important conversation. I was very pleased to have the response that I had from these folks, fine folks here on the panel, helping us, first of all, to understand why the census is so important and why did the Constitution demand that or make that a requirement every 10 years. So this has been going on for a long time. And it's a pretty important piece of the kinds of decisions that are made with regard to the distribution of money and the kinds of programs that are supported. And we're going to learn a lot more about that as we hear from our panelists. Also, I was very pleased to have, I'm sorry, now I'm going to forget your name. Oh, Dawn. Thank you for wearing your name tag. Dawn is here tonight from the city of Nevis, who has already taken some pretty significant steps to make sure that people are aware of and at least being prepared to participate in the census. It's a pretty important thing, and I really appreciate you coming also. A lot of fine folks here tonight. I'm going to just simply introduce our panel members as we get going here. And I really appreciated Tim as the person who first said yes. I mean, this is a wonderful thing when somebody says yes. Tim has been employed by the Headwaters Regional Development Commission since 1983. Tim currently serves as Executive Director after many years as Community Development Director. Tim graduated from the University of Iowa with a Bachelor of Science degree in Geography in 1979, and I smiled when I read that, and received a Master of Community and Regional Planning from Iowa State University in 1983. Tim has been involved in a variety of planning and development work over the past 34 years. He assisted Hubbard County complete its first ever land use plan and helped staff similar planning efforts, including the land use plan and zoning and subdivision regulations for 3 jurisdictions in the Bemidji area, operating under a joint powers and orderly annexation agreement. What's happening there? What am I missing?
It's okay. Keep going.
Much of Tim's work activities have been housing related. The HRDC helps local governments define housing needs and develop implementation strategies. The HRDC created the Headwaters Housing Development Corporation to develop affordable housing throughout the region. Tim has also been part of a staff team that provides support to the Hubbard County Housing and Redevelopment Authorities. HRAs have historically undertaken housing rehabilitation activities, developed affordable single-family houses, and provided down payment assistance to moderate-income home buyers. And I think what I'm going to do is just say, Tim, take it on, and start out the conversation with your presentation. And then we'll go to Mary, and then...
Lawrence, was Andrew going to use his PowerPoint first?
Oh, it's Andrew's PowerPoint that's
Yes.
up there?
Tim's got one too.
Yeah, but we'd have to switch them.
Yeah, we can do it.
Can you do it quickly? Okay.
Now we know what we're doing.
Okay.
Oh, good. Glad you
Well, write it down.
Just take,
Okay.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I about fell asleep, but
Can you use the microphone?
I will do that. Good reminder. Well, first of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for...
Really close to.
It is... It would be why here, I don't see it. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the leadership you're providing on what I agree is a really important issue. And thank you for all of those of you who are attending for your interest in the 2020 census. As Florence said, it is something that's really important. And I appreciate being here, and I appreciate being part of this panel, people that I've worked with historically, and I'm happy that you're all part of this as well. I'd like to share with you just a little bit of my perspective and my background, and a couple things I'll mention is one of my very early projects when I first started with the HRDC was working on a redevelopment project in Park Rapids. It's a neighborhood just south of where Burger King is right now, where we did a major redevelopment project in the mid-'80s. That included relocating bulk oil tanks, taking a whole bunch of leased buildings down, and major project. And I still drive through there every time I'm in town just to look at it because it's a pretty cool, it's one of my favorite projects that I had the opportunity to be involved in. Another thing I'll just mention is one of the roles that we've played at the HRDC is we historically were a census data center for many years. And I was the person in our office that fielded a lot of the data requests from people in the region. And that whole thing has changed so dramatically, and I'll share a little bit of my background on that in some of the comments that I'll make as we go through this. There we go. Again, thank you for all of your participation in this. I want to start by just a couple little comments on what the census is. There's a bunch of censuses that take place. There's a census of government, census of manufacturers, census of transportation. But most often when we talk about the census, what people are referring to is the decennial census of population and housing. It's a major, extremely robust process that takes place every 10 years. And I want to give you just a little bit of background on my history with how this data gets unloaded from the Census Bureau down to people that end up being users at the back end. Back in 1970, the census came to us in a couple little books, and we got information that showed population and housing statistics. This is actually the census of housing for Minnesota for 1970. The population one is about twice this big, but still not very much. A couple bound volumes that sat side by side, and that was the data that was available. By the time 1980 rolled around, we ended up getting a whole bunch of printouts from the census that were generated by, I think, the Machine Readable Data Center at the University of Minnesota. And they sent us information from the census that I had a couple of drawers in a file cabinet, and I had information available for each of the counties in our region, all of the cities, and all of the townships. And it amounted to about 10 pages per jurisdiction. That was the data that we had that was available to us. By the time 1990 rolled around, we ended up with similar type information, and 2000 came around and everything came on a CD, so we didn't have paper copies of anything anymore. We could print those things out. But instead of having, like in the year 1990, it was a whole roll, basically a wall full of volumes of census information. It was really overkill, but people didn't have access to the information very readily. In 2000, stuff became available on CD-ROM, so we had more stuff on a CD than we had on a whole wall in the office, which was pretty impressive. And we needed to have a little bit of software that would help us retrieve the data from the CDs, but it became a little bit more easy for people to access information, but they still had to call us. Then, of course, the 2010 census became available, lots and lots of information, but it was available online, and people had access to it. Very democratized way to have access to information, because there are websites out there. And now it's a question, if we get calls from anybody, it's usually about what site do I go to access this specific information I'm looking for. Much more usable now than what it used to be. But again, census of population and housing is what we want to focus on. What kind of data is available? It's a tremendous amount of information that's available by the census. Most of the information requests that we tended to get over the years had to do with population numbers, household numbers, age, race, sex, Hispanic origin. Very basic demographic information, and we would share that information with people. A couple of things I want to, one other thing I'll mention. This might be a little bit out of order, but why is the census important? Federal funding is dispersed based on a lot of the characteristics that are identified in the census reports. $15.5 billion in federal funds allocated annually in Minnesota based on census. The census is a way of allocating those dollars. And that's important, and I'll share a little bit more with that in a minute. But what it amounts to is $1,500 per capita. And the significance of that is, if we're missing people, if people do not get identified in the census counts, there's a financial implication to communities because we miss out on those resources. And there are characteristics of the population, certain characteristics that provide a higher likelihood that some people might get missed. I want to share with you this, you can't see this very well, I wanted to share a little bit of information on what geographic level of detail is available in the census. I'm not sure everybody's aware of this, but of course there's national statistics that come out, so we can provide a really good glimpse of what the overall characteristics of the U.S. population is. That information is also available at the state level, congressional districts, tribal nations, counties, cities, census tracts, school districts, zip codes, townships, census designated places. So for example, in Hubbard County, places like Guthrie, Nary, Dorset, there are actual census figures available for those communities, even though they're not incorporated municipal corporations.
You're not going to tell Dorset that, are you?
Have to break it to the mayor.
Yeah.
And then block groups, and all the way down to the block level. The detail of the statistics that are available change based on the level of geography. There's a lot more detailed information available for the larger jurisdictions. But you can actually get numbers all the way down to the block level when it comes to things like the number of people and the number of households. And it's really interesting if you map that out, because you can get a really good sense of what the population density is. And there's a lot of good planning activities that maybe Andrew will mention with some of the things that he ends up doing in the planning field by having access to that level of detailed information. Census data is great in the sense of being able to compare information over time. We can go back to the 1950 census and look at population in the city of Park Rapids, for example, and we can carry that through every census up until 2010 and be able to look at some of that trend data. Some of the geographies, like counties, states, those geographies stay constant over time. Census tracts work that way, which is kind of a neighborhood concept in an urban area, a little bit different in a rural area, but still those boundaries are fixed relatively. Some of the geographies change over time. Cities, for example, city of Park Rapids, if there's an annexation, that boundary is going to change over time. So you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples, and yet you still want to know characteristics of the city. So you want to have that flexibility with that geography. But those are things to pay attention to. It's interesting because you can compare census data over time, and you can compare census data by comparing geographies. How does Park Rapids stack up against Bemidji or Nevis or other communities? And it's a standardized data set. A lot of data that's available you really can't compare because the methodologies are different in different places. The census is a standard, and it's the gold standard for data. And it's really important because you need to be able to make those comparisons because it's used to set policy. And so that's really important in that respect. What's the environment in the census? I'm not going to read all of this, but there's a couple I wanted to highlight because it's becoming more and more difficult to get everybody to respond to the request to complete the census forms. And part of that is we're a much more mobile population, so it's hard to track people down. We have much more diversity in living arrangements. That it's not the Leave It to Beaver kind of everybody's in a single family home with 3 kids and all that. It's just different. Household makeup is very different than what it used to be. All kinds of different living quarters that are available. We have to figure out ways to access that. We're just a really increasingly diverse population. We have a lot of languages spoken other than English, and sometimes it's more challenging to reach some of those people. And then maybe the biggest one of all is just a distrust in government. Why do you need this information? And how safe is it going to be if I answer all these questions and give it to you? Are you going to have access to private information about me? Well, the answer is no. It doesn't get produced or distributed at that level, but making people feel fully confident in that is still somewhat of a challenge. And I think that might be the biggest challenge, is helping people overcome that concern. So why is it important? Well, one, I think Florence mentioned earlier, it's mandated in the Constitution that there's a decennial census every 10 years. It's something that we've done actually since 1790. The census has been taking place before the White House was occupied. If you think about that, that's pretty impressive. That's a trend data set that's available since that time. So it's been conducted every 10 years, and one of the primary uses of the census, and one of the reasons it is mandated, is that's how the congressional districts are formulated. It's based on census counts. This is maybe a little bit difficult to see, but if Minnesota ends up losing a congressional seat, we have 8 congressional seats in Minnesota right now. And if you can see that at all, the bright color on the right-hand side is Congressional District 8, which is the district that you're in. That's a huge geographic area. And if we go from 8 to 7, that geographic area is going to be significantly larger. The same with the 7th district. Colin Peterson already flies an airplane around the region just to meet his constituents. To think that that district is going to get bigger, it's not only the size of the district, but the characteristic of the district is going to change because it's going to have a different makeup. And we all know there's going to be political battles around redistricting when that happens as well. Not necessarily for the better of any of us, but that's what's going to happen. Minnesota is one of the states that's at risk of losing a congressional seat. This is the same message that we were told in 2010. And we were fortunate that we held on to our seat, but this year it is definitely at risk. And so if somebody asks, why is it important that we get the count out? It's a congressional seat that we would lose at the expense of some other area that might gain it. And we need to hold on to that. Yes, ma'am?
This is going to be a stupid question. Based on the population of the state, yes.
Yes.
So we're declining?
No, but we're
After
not
this
growing
winter,
as
we
fast
are.
as some other areas, so it's all relative. Within this growth, we're taking up a smaller proportion. And so we can grow substantially and still be at risk of losing a congressional seat.
Okay.
And we are
Competing
growing.
with the warm states where people move to.
That's what I said, this winter is.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to just point out a couple things. You know, what are the characteristics of those people that are hard to count? Well, areas that have a lot of vacant housing units, check, we have that, right? I think all the areas that are kind of hospitality-oriented, tourism-based, are going to have a lot of vacant units, seasonal units. Just becomes more challenging for enumerators to figure out what's going on. Where there's a lot of rental units, Park Rapids is about 50% renter population, so we meet that characteristic. Areas that are lower income, poverty statistics, people where you have a population of color, people speaking the second language, those are kind of the characteristics where people might be a little harder to count. This area sort of hits a lot of those categories. And so I think in terms of thinking about what we need to do, this sort of plays into that. Well, Mary will smile at this. Our previous director, Cliff Tweedale, always would say, leadership is about defining reality and providing hope. And what you're doing by having this discussion is defining reality, right? The census, it's important, we need to do this. I think there is a part of providing hope as well, and that is there's 435 congressional districts in the country. That's the allocation part of the formula. And right now, if you look at the modeling for what they're projecting to happen, we're at 437. So we're sort of on the cusp. It's not like we're out of the running. We have not lost a seat at this point. The trick is, can we do a good enough count throughout Minnesota to make up the difference and show that we have enough people? If we count everybody, we probably won't lose a seat, because there will be other places in the country that won't count everybody. So it's how we do counting relative to how other people do counting. This doesn't have to do with what the reality is in the field. It has to do with who's going to get out there and do the work and make it happen. And I'm an optimist. I think if we did it in 2010, why can't we do it in 2020 and hold on to that seat? What's happening in the state? Well, Florence has talked to me just briefly about this sense that there are complete count committees forming. And some of them are just forming now. Some have been around for a little bit. There is one that's forming in Bemidji, Beltrami County. They haven't met yet. But the complete count committees are forming because the Census Bureau isn't going to do this by themselves. They're going to need some local help because they would say they're underfunded. I'll get back to that in a minute. But the better job we can do at the grassroots level, at the local level, to make sure that people are comfortable filling out the forms, the better off we'll be. And I don't know much about this, but I do know there's a bill that's been introduced at the legislative level for $2.5 million to help support census counts. It's something I'm putting on here just to encourage you to keep your eyes open for that, because if there is a local effort, it would be nice if there were some resources available to help support that good work.
I'm
Yes,
glad
sir.
you brought that up. I was going to include that in my presentation, but failed to put that in there. That bill just got its first committee hearing today.
Awesome, I didn't know that, but that's good. People take this really seriously. It's a nonpartisan issue to encourage and make sure that we get the best possible count, because there are significant implications. I threw this in just for fun, but The initial census cost $44,000, and the 2010 census, we had $12.9 billion to support that. It's a mammoth effort. The reason I put it in there, though, is because doubling that is not going to be what makes the difference. What makes the difference is this local piece, the complete count committees, other local efforts that just do everything possible to encourage people to complete the forms and make sure that they're counted. I mentioned earlier some of the hard-to-count populations. Mary and I work quite a bit with Red Lake. We do projects with the reservation, and we always hear up there how severely undercounted they are. And it would not be a surprise that that's the case. The real trick is, how do we get people to turn out and complete the forms? That's where the hard part is. So, what can you do to help the 2020 census? Fill out your form, help other people fill out their forms. If there's a complete count committee, join in the effort. If there isn't one, encourage the formation of a complete count committee, because there are things that can be done locally. There's other work, like the Nevis example, where the city has been doing a variety of different things to help get the word out about the census. Those kind of efforts are the gold that are going to make this whole effort successful. And so I know, a very quick overview, and I thank you for listening. Now I think it's a chance just to listen to people provide some information about uses of the data and how it's important at the community level for planning, whether that's for economic development, community development, or business.
Thank you very much, Tim, for giving us an overview. It's an important, very, very important topic, and hopefully we will spread the word because we're here. Mary is going to talk with us next. Mary Thompson is brand new to the governing of the Hubbard County, and really, really pleased to have her here. Mary has been with the Headwaters Regional Development Commission since 1992. She's responsible for ensuring organizational effectiveness by providing leadership for the operational and financial functions, as well as partnering with the executive director to develop and implement organizational strategies, policies, and practices. She is a certified housing finance development professional and actively works on multifamily housing development projects throughout the Headwaters region. Mary also serves as the director to Beltrami County HRA and now to Hubbard County Regional Economic Development Commission. Very pleased to have Mary speak to the issues of what we need.
Thank you, and I don't have a PowerPoint, so we don't have to go through the struggle of trying to figure out how to make that all work. As Florence mentioned, I have several hats with the commission. Two of them are under the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and my most recent is the Economic Development Commission for Hubbard County. And I thought that I would sort of interchange both of those organizations and let you know what we really do with the data from the census that we receive. So most cases, we're making a case when we want to look at getting some grant resources or financial assistance from something outside of the normal parameters of taxability or property taxes. So if we're making a case that we have some reason to have a development or a project or a business come, then we want to be able to make a case for that. And so we'll use the census information to have an unbiased opinion of what it is or what the case is that we're trying to make. So in the case of a housing development project, some of the things that we would want to show is the number of population that we have here, how many of those would be low income or high income, what the demographics are. So, where do those qualifications for the individuals who live there are. Some of the other things that you've been hearing a lot about, especially when it comes to housing, is that in the state of Minnesota, there's a high incidence of individuals who are cost burdened. And what that means is that they are paying over 30% of their gross income to support housing. And then that means that given those high percentages, that they have less money available for all of the other things. Well, what tells us that is the census. So we are able to look at what people's incomes are and what gross rents are and the percentages of populations based on that information that we're getting from the census. And that information, once we have the census, there's state demographers who actually take that information and do some projections to try and keep it more current. So they'll look at, okay, what do we think is going to happen from 2010 to 2015 or 2016, and so then they help us with sort of more current projections on where their numbers are, and then at 2020 again we take another snapshot and say, oh, here's where it really is. And so that's what it does. The other thing is, when it comes to a business perspective, businesses want to locate where they know that they're going to have either the employees or the potential for revenue. And the way that they find that is by looking at the census. If they know that they need to have X number of employees and that their business requires this kind of a criteria, maybe it's more of a physical job, so they're thinking that they probably need a little bit of a younger workforce. They're going to look to the census and say, are those folks available for me to be there? If they aren't, then it's going to be a lot harder for me to be able to locate in that area. The same thing is sort of on the retail side. I have this product, and this product is likely going to cost about this much. What is the income of the area that I'm looking to locate in? And is there a likelihood that that demographic of folks who are living there are going to have the capacity to buy that product that I have? The other thing is, if they're looking at providing more of the non-necessities of life. So if you're looking to locate in a place where individuals are cost burdened for their rent or their housing, they're paying 60% of their income for that, how likely is it that they're going to be able to afford some of the things that are rent, groceries, or transportation? So that can enter into a business's consideration about whether or not it makes sense for them to locate in a particular area. So from looking at the business planning or the housing development planning, it really does factor in the information to what decisions and that businesses will make as far as whether or not to locate. I think right now one of the very biggest ones is, do you have enough warm bodies? So that really is a sort of a crisis statewide. And as I said, it really does help to make a case to outside funders about whatever it is that you're looking to obtain money for, if you can use the census information to make that case that your need is there one way or the other.
Thank you very much. We go on to the next panelist, who is Andrew Mack. He's brand new also to Park Rapids government as the city planner. His career as a certified professional planner spans 3 decades. He has worked as a generalist planner in both the public and private sectors in Minnesota, in both the metro areas and throughout greater Minnesota. Andrew has also served as a community team leader with the Minnesota Design Team, a group of volunteers from various professional disciplines to help guide communities in planning their long-range community vision and future direction. He has also served as co-chair of the Minnesota chapter of the American Planning Association Legislative and Law Committee for the past 10 years. Andrew's undergraduate degree in urban planning comes from St. Cloud University in the early 1980s, and he obtained a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of Texas, where he started his career and family before returning to Minnesota. He's made the whole trip. Andrew.
So in preparing for this, I talked with Tim, traded messages on the phone, and he said he thought we should have a little fun with this. And so I was going to do a joke, but I thought more of a kind of an example where we kind of experiment where we go out and we. Hi, I'm with the government. I'm here to help.
And are we doing a good job with it or not?
Yes. That's usually the response I get when we have to put our enforcement hat on. It's not always the friendliest thing in the world, but one of the important things that the city has to do in certain instances. So. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's take a little bit of a look here at understanding our community composition, demographics, and why the census is an important part of what we do here at the city or the local level. So why should we care about demographics, and what are they? How does it help define a community composition? So these are some of the things Tim talked about already, where we look at existing and forecasted population data, household data, economic data, cultural data, other types of informational things to help you sleep at night if you can, if you start reading census data and demographics. So that's about the only huge part of that. But I do want to comment on the economic data component. Aside from the census, the city, in cooperation with the regional aspect of Mary's new position with Hubbard County, a year ago in 2017 undertook a market area profile for the region. That work was done in cooperation with the grant and assistance from the University of Minnesota Extension. That information was done based on 2017 data about the community. That information was not presented to the community. So at a recent Action Park Rapids meeting just held here in the last couple of weeks, that topic was discussed, and that's something that the Chamber, Mary's role, and my role here at the city look to help roll out and provide more for the community in the future, hopefully before the end of this year. So just taking a look at the City of Park Rapids and its comprehensive plan, that work was done in 2008, so just over 10 years ago. And this is the type of demographic where we track through the census historically, look all the way back to 1900, when Park Rapids was a sleepy little town of 1,300. And it looks like we rose to a peak in the mid 60s, which would be obviously the baby boom era, where we had post World War II and growth of the suburbs and other urban and rural areas throughout all of the country, but certainly in Minnesota in particular, to a small dip, but then up to the planned totals here of 3519 as a projection in 2006, about the time that the plan was undertaken. So in looking like right now at the actual count in 2010 from the census, Park Rapids population was 3,709, and based on the state population estimate, as Mary referred to from the state demographer's office, that estimate as of 2 years ago was 3,976. That same estimate also yielded, I guess Tim talked about how many houses are making up the rental population of the community. Our actual number of licensed rental units at the city is about 900 total rental units that are inspected on a 3-year rotational basis, so approximately 1/3 of those are inspected every year. That is about, like he said, just about half of the 1,923 households that we had in the Park Rapids city area. And I just threw that number in there to show you that we've got just about 2 people per household, which is kind of an alarming small number, really. I mean, for a rural, community that's got a substantial, school district and so forth, that's an interesting number to me. And so I'm not sure how that's declined over time, but I suspect it has substantially declined over time. So that also, as Tim referred to, ties into how communities go about doing their comprehensive plans. And so really, I think I like to ask the question for folks when we're doing a long-range plan for communities, so who really cares about the future of the community, and why should we care about the future? And so really, I mean, what is a comprehensive plan anyways? And what's interesting is through the course of my career, which would include our colleagues here, that's changed over the course of many decades. And we're more concerned about things now like, active health and other types of things for, food planning, different things like that really were never part of, the planning profession when we were back in school back in the 70s and 80s, that's for sure. So, but it is a collection of data that is an important tool. The whole census is a very, very important part of how we go about analyzing the community, because you can't figure out where you want to go until you first understand where you've come from to get to where the point you are today, to help you think about and make policy decisions of where you want to go in the future. And so those are typically through various processes, surveys or whatever, or going out and collecting census data, finding out about other things people care about or are concerned about for their community. And typically that is an important message for a community when it undertakes its long-range planning. And it's not just the crunching of the data, but it's, why you can make a difference, how you can get involved. And usually the age-old phrase from us planners is typically those who show up make the rules. And that's kind of the truth. So really, I pose the question to you folks that are here today is, what would you have the city do if it were up to you? And so that's maybe something to think about, and certainly something to think about as you decide to perhaps get involved with the complete community counts committees, or at some future point, perhaps when the time comes for the city to undertake its long-range plan, to perhaps consider stepping forward and serving on a citizen committee to do that. So this is a little bit of piece promoting the purpose of the meeting here. I understood. We have suggested municipal complete census city or committees and membership. And so who does that consist of? Well, this is what they're telling us at the national level. That it would be heads of relevant government agencies, department heads of the school system, regional associations, community organizations, members from priority targeted areas, representatives from faith-based organizations, business associations, chambers, that type of thing. We're also, in the case of nearby communities, we would have universities, colleges, foundations, or certainly we do have foundations in Park Rapids and other types of philanthropic organizations. So I'm going to put one little tie in here. This is sort of a little thought about some of the census and the change in demographic. And so I just use our newest assisted care living project as an example of showing that, as the baby boom era ages and goes into that retirement area, we have sort of what I call my theory for our area about that, and so I'll explain a little bit of what that is. Here's what I see sort of as a trend in Minnesota. We've got successful people that are maybe living in the metropolitan area, Over time, they decided to find their beautiful slice of heaven on the lake up in the Park Rapids region. They got the cabin on the lake. They've been coming up for years, bringing the kids. Well, guess what? Finally, eventually the kids say, hey, Mom and Dad, we're doing all the work now and you're not doing all the work. Maybe what we need to do is have us buy the cabin from you, and we can still come together, but maybe what we need to think about is putting you in a place where, you know, you don't have all the steps, you don't have all the lawn maintenance, and here you go, here's a brand new, beautiful, and what a nice new addition to Park Rapids. Fortunately, it's not the only, we have others, but I think there is, and of course then the kids have been coming up over time and they're finally sick of the traffic in the cities and whatever, so they move up here, and now we have a dynamic or a changing economic of what's going on in our region as a result of that. And I've had that verified time and time again, so I think I may have to develop the theory a little bit further. I'm not sure. Maybe Tim can help me. He's better at that stuff than I am. But the main point here is that is an aging population. And experience has shown over time that folks who are, feel that they want to give back to their community, that can become an engaged citizenry. Those are the folks, in addition to young people, but realistically speaking, those aging populations are the folks that will engage and will get involved in their community. And so that's who we should definitely be thinking about as we look for cooperation and participation in various community activities. So, some closing thoughts. The 2020 census is an important lead activity into comprehensive planning initiatives for a 2020 update, which I think at this point the city has in its capital improvement budget dollars allocated for that. We don't know how that process is going to go, what's going to happen with it. I will tell you that the topic of an upcoming joint work session between the City Council and the Planning Commission that is scheduled for April 9th before the regular City Council meeting, along with other topics that we'll be working on that evening, but that is one of the discussion items. And so, based on the census timing, I'm saying that project is a good timing because having that data in place is such an important aspect to truly understanding where we're at as a community at that snapshot point in time. And also, I think it's important to know that typically a comprehensive plan, even though I didn't tell you all the stuff that normally goes in there, is usually a 20-year look at the future of a community and where it sees itself going over the 20-year period. Typically, the right timing for doing an update to that plan is about every 10 years. So we're just a little bit about at the right timing and having to wait another year or two after that so this important census can be completed, again, I think is very good timing. Also, full participation in the census help us assure better information for the community to plan effectively for the future of our community. So I think that's another important factor. So once we have that, then we take that energy, and so now we're done with that project, what can we move on to next? Well, maybe it might be the community's long-range plan. And also that participation in that process will hopefully, as we think about what would you do if it was up to you, will help assure a better plan for the future of Park Rapids and our community. So, thanks for being here tonight. And answer questions if you have any later.
I hope you're keeping your questions in mind because we will have some time to do that. Finally, we're going to hear from Diane. And Diane Dennis has been in the real estate business. Boy, since you graduated from high school, it seems like. That's really amazing. Wonderful. Diane grew up in northern Minnesota and relocated to Park Rapids in 1980, graduating from Park Rapids Area High School in 1982. Diane started her real estate career working as a secretary at Century 21 Northern Lights Realty here in Park Rapids. In 1983, she began working as an office manager at Dolores P. Clack Real Estate, obtained her real estate license in 1990 and her broker's license in 1992. In 1999, she became part owner of what is now Coldwell Banker Clack and Dennis Real Estate here in Park Rapids. Diane has also been an active volunteer in the Park Rapids community. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
I promise to keep this brief. I'm a little intimidated by all the college degrees and education sitting up here at the table with me, but I know a number of you in the room. From a real estate perspective, the census figures can help us identify if we have, as they've already attested to, we do have a large number of renters in our community. If those renters are at an income level where they could potentially be homeowners, then we need to be figuring out how to provide that housing for them. I'm sure everybody in the room is aware we have a shortage of entry-level housing for homeowners in our community. The census showing the family size, and as he said, it is declining. Family size is just, I mean, I come from a family of 8 children. You don't see that many families anymore who have that many children. But family size helps us determine what sort of housing should be built. We are approached by contractors on a regular basis. I'm thinking of building some houses. What should I build? Well, should they be building 2-bedroom homes, or should they be building 4-bedroom homes? If the population is aging, they would typically build homes that are more with everything on, all of the amenities on one level. And if we're transitioning into getting the renters into their own homes, you can build split level housing, have a family room in the basement. You know, that is all affected by the information that we can get from the census. If a business is looking to move to our community, as they said, they're going to look at our population numbers and whether or not we have the workforce available. If we do have workforce available and those people are currently renters and a business comes in, that means they're more likely to be able to afford that housing that we're talking about. We also don't want to be, if businesses are using the census figures and a large corporation decides to build a manufacturing plant here, we don't want to be in the position that, I believe it was Thief River Falls, has had to bus workers in from many, many miles away because there wasn't enough housing. So we need to be proactive in our planning, and we also need to do it in a sensible manner. We can't just be throwing up random housing and hoping they come. So we use those. You know, all of this just is one big piece that I think the general public doesn't stop to think about just how important all of that information is for everything that we do. It's important for the medical community and bringing in doctors. It's important for the schools, which all of that affects the real estate industry. If we're bringing in more doctors, they all need a place to live. The schools need more teachers. They all need a place to live. So it's all just one gigantic piece, and I think it's important that we be able to get the information out there to the public of why it's important to answer those census questions. That's really all I have.
Good.
I just think it's really wonderful that you made a slide just for this time. Thank you for being here tonight. Well, now it's time for you to ask the questions. Go ahead.
I'm curious what the questions are. You said there were 10, basically 10 questions on the census. I can't remember from 10 years back what those questions are. How many live in the house? Income? What are the other questions?
Education. Yeah.
I finished.
I have not seen the questionnaire they're going to use, but we've been told that it's likely not going to change significantly from the last census. My understanding is that the focus is going to be on the population, housing, whether you own or rent, how many kids you have, or how many people there are in the household.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think it's going to get into the income. One of the things I didn't mention in the census has changed in the last two censuses, where we used to have a short form and a long form, and the long form was a sample survey of 1 in every 6 households, and they got all of the detailed questions, which included things like income and poverty and what I always call the good stuff, because that's what people are usually interested in. And the short form, which is what everybody got, was the population and housing counts, and that had to be done quicker, and it had to get to the president's desk. There's deadlines, because that's what's used for the apportionment process. Now, everybody is just going to get one form, and we get this 10-year snapshot. But the other thing that's going on is there's an annual survey that's done that everybody gets, or that a sample of people get. It's a very small sample. It's called the American Community Survey. And that information comes out. The disadvantage with that is you get this small survey, and there's a fairly large margin of error with the data. But what they produce is what they call a rolling average over 5 years. And you get that data, but you have to use it a little bit more carefully than you did historically. The advantage is you don't have to wait every 10 years to get the numbers. You get it every year. It's just, right now it's like 2013 to 2017. Next year that same data will be produced, and it'll be 2014 through 2018, an average of those 5 years.
Does anybody else have something to add?
I got one thing.
I'm going to put this right around your back.
Unless the courts tell the administration differently, there will be one new question that will come out this year on the census questionnaire, and that will be as to whether or not you are a legal U.S. citizen.
I thought that had been decided.
No,
That
no,
hasn't been
it's going
decided.
to
That's
I think
going
it's still in the courts.
in
But-
April.
Unless the court makes a decision, that will come out in the form.
More of a question then, in the book that you passed around from the 70s, wasn't it?
Mhm.
So they actually were asking, how do you heat your house? Do you have a clothes washer? All of
And
those.
some of that's still in there in the sample part.
One of the things that I had read also is that actually the information is now being able to be gathered from other data, other kinds of things, than from the census itself. Okay. All right, is there another question?
So if I'm thinking to North Dakota when the oil boom was going on out there, and then I'm thinking of any major projects that may be happening in Minnesota in 2020. We will have a lot of workers who are here on a temporary basis. How are they counted? I mean, how does that work when there's a 6-month boom or there's whatever in the area? Because they are actually living in the area. There are people who are going to be here.
My understanding of the way that works is that the census will take place on April 1st, and it's where people are residing on April 1st. I get the question a lot, how are students counted?
How are students?
Well, it's where they live on April 1st. So if they're living in a dorm, they're going to be counted as living in a dorm. Their household is going to be dormitory living, and they're going to be counted in the community that the school is in. But if they're living at home, they're going to be counted at home if they're commuting to school or whatever. And so I'm assuming the same thing's going to happen with those workers. Even they might be there 6 months, they might be there 3 months, but if they're there April 1st, that's the magic date.
Anyone have anything else to? Okay. Another question?
When they do decide whether a legal citizen is going to be counted, how's that going to affect the total count?
I don't know.
I don't.
I have a thought on that.
Okay, Tim?
I'm guessing, I don't know. I don't think it's good in terms of getting people out. We talked about, vulnerable people being undercounted, and I think that's going to make that problem worse. From a parochial standpoint, the question is, does that work to our benefit or disadvantage? If there's severe undercounts in the areas that have a really high population of illegal immigrants, for example, and they get undercounted to a certain degree more than we do, maybe that helps us save a congressional seat. I'm not saying I want that to happen, but it's not necessarily a terribly bad thing from the apportionment standpoint. But if we really are truly wanting to have complete counts nationwide, it's not a good thing, because it's one more, when you see that whole thing with distrust in government and mobility and all those factors that keep counts from being as good as they could be, that's a major factor in my mind.
I'm going to add one more thing to that. I know that I read somewhere that one of the courts, and I don't know whether it's at an appeals level, has thrown that question out, but the part that they ruled it out for was it didn't follow the process of the Census Bureau, because they're supposed to test the questions and find out how relevant they are, and a whole procedure, sort of like the testing that the school does, that when you have those standardized tests, they put the questions in the test for 2 or 3 times before and then make it count as a test question that they actually can grade on. So what the Supreme Court will do, because it's going to go that far, who knows? Well, yeah. Other questions? Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions.
Here, Arnie, right behind you is the microphone.
I've got a couple of questions based on the comments that were made. You were concerned about the accuracy of the census, and it sounds like you're only interested in the undercounts. How about overcounts? What's to prevent that from happening?
Who would like to take that on? Want to take it? Do you want to?
That sounds like a team question.
A team question? You have to start, Tim.
I'm very comfortable saying I don't know. I don't have a great feel for that. Other than there is some, I'm not a statistician, there is some statistical modeling that takes place. The census, at the very roots of the census, one of the very first things they do is a count of the structures in a community, and they have an understanding of what's occupied and what's vacant based on the address lists that they have. So it would be highly unusual. I mean, they would catch something if it was off by any significant number, just based on that modeling.
Well, I've heard from people that have actually worked in the census taking. First of all, you get a piece of paper, and if that isn't satisfactory, then they have individual people that go out and follow up to get those that didn't respond. And I don't know how they make the difference, but they know there's maybe a structure. Nobody submitted a count from that structure. So they go there, and a guy comes to the door, and how many people are living here? I'm all by myself. But he has obvious evidence there are people there, but there are people that don't want to be counted. They have their own reasons for staying anonymous. They don't want to be counted.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm from ICE, and I'm here to count.
So, how accurate, based on your experience and experience over time, how accurate are these censuses in numbers? What is there a percentage they allow for overcount, undercount, or no count?
I've never heard of anybody complaining about an overcount. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen in some case. I do think there are places that feel that they're undercounted. I mentioned Red Lake as one, where we hear that consistently when we're dealing with them on planning projects. And they've done their own enumeration and found that the numbers are significantly higher than the Census Bureau counts. The Census Bureau, I'm answering with a question, but one of the things that always baffles me is they have a sense of where the undercounts take place, and they have ways to model for that. I'm not exactly sure if they can understand it from a modeling standpoint, why they can't just do the counts that way, but that's not the way it's done evidently. I don't know if anybody else has.
I lived in California 20 years ago in Ashtown. And there was a whole bunch of people lived out in the river bottom. They called it the navigable river, but it was dry, and people would gather up whatever they could find, paper and lumber, and make themselves a little shack out there in the riverbed. And there was brush growing up around, so you couldn't see them yet, but know where they were or find them. And they had a big problem getting those people counted. They would fly over with a helicopter and find locations and go out and get counted.
Arnie, we have someone who would like to ask a question also. Okay.
I was just going to follow up with Sue's earlier question, maybe some of what you were saying. So is there any part of that question about your housing and how many live there that asks if you are living there permanently or if you are a temporary resident? No.
I don't think so, but I don't know absolutely.
Because college towns and, you know, there's other circumstances where that would be a factor.
Traveling.
That's great.
If I'm not mistaken, the question here, it doesn't, recently it has in the past, does ask whether or not you are a seasonal or permanent resident.
Okay.
So I believe that that is part of the data that's collected, whether it's the short form or the longer form. I think that is statistically been part of the data set, part of the census material.
Then you would hope that it was more than just those two, seasonal or permanent, like temporary worker or student or, you know, different categories. Seasonal, 3 months or 6 months maybe, but.
The only thing I might have added back to Sue's earlier comment, where I thought she was going with the question, it actually talks about some of the new employment centers occurring in the state. We have a big project of growth in Thief River Falls in their region right now, and that's going to increase the employment number substantially in the region. And right now, what they're struggling with is trying to figure out how to build enough housing to put those people in places to live so they're not driving from 30, 60, 90, 100 miles away to get to work every day. And so those other types of big projects that we're hearing about, including, it's another big location. I think it's a metro community that's getting another huge Amazon. Amazon. It's North Metro, I think. But so that type of stuff is affecting the state as a whole, but regions in particular. And certainly the growth in Thief River Falls, Bemidji, which has also experienced continuous growth over time, is a part of that region that it also affects the Park Rapids and Hubbard County region as well.
I understand that many people who do not want to participate are concerned that the data will get out, their neighbor will know, or whatever their answers to their questions, and it may not be as significant on this every 10-year count, but maybe on the more detailed ones. But could you speak to the issue of privacy and who can get the detailed data rather than just the overall results?
Can I give you a chance on this one?
That's a Tim question.
Well, again, I don't know, but the one thing I do know is Census Bureau employees get information and they compile it relatively quickly. I know that there are big civil penalties and fines for violating data privacy. I've never heard of that being a real issue in practice. I think there's a perception issue, and it's probably more aligned with helping people overcome their concern that something's going to be leaked. I've just simply never heard of it actually happening.
Based on your experience.
Arnie, we have another person to ask a question?
Okay, you say it's on April 1st that the count is. We have a lot of summer people. We want you to do the count on July 3rd.
Amen.
I was just wondering, based on your experience with this information that's gathered, how accurate and how reliable do you think it is? Have you found problems with it?
You know, the numbers become so institutionalized, it almost becomes substituted for fact. And I think we have to always have the attitude that it's not necessarily fact, but it's probably pretty good information. And especially when you're talking about the 100% count data. If you're talking about the details from the surveys, some of that information, and I'll be honest, I've fielded calls from people for that detailed information for many years. I've never had a single person ask me, what's the margin of error on that data? When people call for the information, they just want a number, because they're writing a grant application or they're doing something and they want something to hang their hat on. But to use the information accurately, you should ask for what the margin of error is. If you're looking at the American Community Survey, for example, and you want to know the poverty rate, it would make a lot of sense in my mind to look at what it's been over a 3 or 4 year period. And if one of those numbers stands out, it's an aberration and the margin of error is probably greater on that one survey than on the other ones. So I just think as a user, there's a little more responsibility now than there used to be when we had the great, really good survey response and the margin of error was a lot smaller. Now it's a little bit more volatile and it takes a little bit more care.
Conversely, though, I think is that everybody is using the same data. And so, because whether or not there's a margin of error, if for example, doing a grant application, if both organizations are using the same data, they have the same level of potential error in it. And so from an outside perspective or the use of the data, it's the best we have. And it's also a level playing field. Everybody's using the same data. So whether or not it's 100% accurate is less critical than everybody using the same sort of benchmark.
Well, the only difference is the survey done by geography, you're going to have one community with its survey, another community with a different survey, and one could have a big aberration and the other not. And so it's still, you can't compare apples to apples necessarily.
I think we have time for one more question, and that would be great. Okay.
All right, I'm seeing these little flyers all over. This one was at the chamber earlier this week. Now, who is organizing that, or do we have Florence? This question is for you. Who locally is organizing that?
And I honestly can't tell you. The distribution of that information could be coming from even the city or from the county. I really do not know where it came from. It comes offline. Where did you find it?
I found it at the chamber.
Okay.
Well, it's just online.
It's on.
And they ask people to print it.
And this was this was printed off by Cece, I believe. Right?
Well, that one, I printed one off, but
Sure.
I saw it at the chamber too.
Sure.
On
Okay.
that.
So, the information can come out in any way, but earlier we were talking about the complete count committees, and the job of the Census Bureau is looking for local communities to really take this seriously, and Nevis has already done so. I was so grateful to the Park Rapids Enterprise for bringing that to my attention. And Dawn, do you want to talk a little bit about that before we close up here? She'll bring you. You can come up here too if you'd like to.
I prefer not to.
Okay.
So I went to the workshop in Staples. They had a workshop that covered some of the same information that you did tonight. I hadn't had a lot of contact with the census before, and so it was kind of a new idea. I didn't realize how important it was until I started to hear about the numbers and then took it back to my boss. And what we brought to our council, and our council met on Monday night, and we didn't form an official CCC group, but we talked about some cost-efficient ways, because we don't know how much reimbursement there's going to be. And we're a small city, and we try to be very frugal with the money that we have. And so what we realized when my boss looked up the numbers is that we get $58,806 we had gotten in 2018 for the local government. And if we didn't get that money, if we didn't have an accurate count, it would raise our tax levy about 20% for our taxpayers. And we take that pretty seriously, and that's a really good incentive to get people out to vote. And so what they talked about at that special meeting was ways that we could, in a cost-effective way, use the infrastructure we already have to get the word out and to connect with people. Of course, we've got a smaller scale than what Hubbard County does or than Park Rapids does. We've got, about 400 people, a little less than 500 people to take care of and count. And so what we do is we send out our monthly water and sewer bills. And so we will be including information on the back of those about getting out to vote. In January, we started doing a city newsletter that has bits and pieces of information. And so we're going to be including our ongoing articles in our April newsletter. We have a little newspaper in our town. We're going to do some work with them and have them do some stories about why it's important and let people see that, this benefits them if they will just take the time to complete the paperwork. We've got a city website. We've got Facebook pages for some of our government entities like our municipal liquor store and our fire department. We're going to use social media because that's very cost effective. We do a small town celebration, Muskie Days. We intend to have a booth there that our city council is going to man because they like connecting with people anyway. The Census Bureau does have cost-effective supplies, pamphlets, banners, and things. So, and most of us are connected with different groups like the chambers. One of our newest council members works for the Park Rapids Chamber, and of course, Teresa's always a wealth of information. And so it's going to be a joint project. Everybody's going to do what they can, but we all connect with different groups of people. And in doing that, we're just going to encourage everybody to take part. And we've even talked about possibly one of the things they suggested at the workshop was for people that are not real computer savvy. And we have some older people or even younger people that are just not computer people. And maybe having something set up in the city office so that when they come in, we can have a spot set up, and if they need assistance, or maybe at the Muskie Day booth, to have something like that set up so that if they're just a little unsure about how to do it, or especially with it only being, we were told 10 or 11 questions, it's fairly simple. Most people, of course, we don't have some of the same problem areas and hard to count populations that other areas do. So that's what we're doing.
So in 2020, Nevis is going to be the county seat.
It's terrific.
I just wanted to thank Don for that information. Would it be possible if you could email me tomorrow or as soon as you could, what you're going to print on the water bills? Because I think that'd be a fairly simple thing for Park Rapids to do, as long as my council and administrators are okay with it. What could it hurt? I think it's a great idea. And especially if the counts start April 1st, so the next water billing cycle probably, which will go out in March.
Well, it's 2020.
Well, but I mean, at some point, I don't know, when, are you doing this on a recurring basis, or?
Yes, we will continue. We'll start right away and get people used to the idea, and then it'll continue.
So, yeah, no rush, but it'd be appreciated. I'll give you my email address. Yeah.
This is very exciting to me. I think that What we need to do really is to understand how important the census data is for all of the planning that we do, and also to understand that our community has maybe has some ideas or thoughts about census that will prevent them from wanting to participate. And the idea here is to give out the positive perspective, why it matters. And hearing Neva's talk about that $50,000, that's not a tiny chunk of change in a little community. Certainly Park Rapids, certainly Hubbard County, certainly our region really can very much benefit from an accurate and a complete count. And all of your being here gives voice to that, and I really appreciate that you have come tonight. I appreciate my compadres in the League of Women Voters who have worked to help put this event on tonight. And is there any one last question that somebody is just burning to ask before we call it we have to clear out of here by 8 o'clock tonight, but we don't have a lot to clear out this time. Any last question that someone has? I'm wondering, I know that here we have the person who's from the Hubbard County Social Services, and you were very excited when I talked with you about the fact that the census matters to the work that you do.
Absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit? Just a little bit.
I can a little bit. It is very important for us, so we have an accurate count for services that we can provide in the community. The population that is growing with our older population, and making sure we have all the services needed to keep people in their homes for as long as they can, and keeping them safe in the homes, and then getting services out to all of the families that we work with. Yes.
Thanks, Deb.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me talk.
Sure. Open mic. Well, thank you again for being here, and thank you so much for the folks who said yes.